What if keeping bloodlines pure actually poisoned them? Throughout history, royal families believed that marrying within their own ranks would preserve their divine right to rule. Instead, they created a genetic nightmare that would haunt entire dynasties. These are the 10 most shocking examples of when royal blood became toxic, transforming kings and queens into living symbols of genetic catastrophe. At number 10, Ferdinand I of the Holy Roman Empire. Ferdinand I ruled the Holy Roman Empire from 1556 to 1564, but his reign was overshadowed by a devastating secret that his court desperately tried to hide. Born with severe epilepsy and a speech impediment so pronounced that his own council members struggled to understand his commands, Ferdinand was the product of generations of Habsburg inbreeding. His parents, Charles V and Isabella of Portugal, were first cousins, continuing a family tradition that valued political alliance over genetic health. Ferdinand's seizures were so violent that he required constant supervision, and his inability to communicate clearly left the empire's most crucial decisions in the hands of his advisors. But Ferdinand's struggles were nothing compared to the horrors that awaited his descendants. Coming in at number 9, Joseph I of Portugal. Taking the 9th spot is Joseph I of Portugal, whose reign from 1750 to 1777 revealed the devastating consequences of the Portuguese royal family's obsession with maintaining bloodline purity. Born to parents who were uncle and niece, Joseph suffered from what court physicians described as divine madness, a condition that modern geneticists now recognize. A severe bipolar disorder complicated by possible schizophrenia, his episodes of paranoia were so intense that he believed his own shadow was plotting against him, and he would spend weeks locked in his chambers, refusing to see anyone except his confessor. The Portuguese court went to extraordinary lengths to hide Joseph's condition, even staging elaborate puppet shows where advisors would move behind curtains to make it appear the king was actively governing. And yet, Joseph's mental torment was merely a preview of worse genetic disasters to come. Stepping into number 8, Frederick William I of Prussia. Frederick William I of Prussia, known as the Soldier King, ruled from 1713 to 1740, but beneath his military facade lay a shocking physical reality that horrified even his own family. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with grotesquely elongated limbs and fingers that resembled twisted branches, Frederick William was the product of repeated cousin marriages within the Hohenzollern dynasty. His condition, now known as Marfan syndrome, caused such severe joint pain that he could barely walk without assistance, yet he obsessively drilled his army for hours each day, screaming orders through gritted teeth. His famous Giants Regiment wasn't just a military innovation. It was his desperate attempt to surround himself with men whose unusual height made his own deformities seem less monstrous. Court records reveal that Frederick William's own children were terrified of their father's appearance, with his son Frederick the Great later writing that his father looked like a scarecrow come to life. However, Frederick William's physical abnormalities pale in comparison to the genetic horrors that plagued other royal houses. At number 7, Isabella Clara Eugenia of Spain. Isabella Clara Eugenia, daughter of Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, represents one of history's most heartbreaking examples of how royal inbreeding destroyed promising lives. Born in 1566, Isabella was intellectually brilliant and politically astute, but her body told a different story entirely. The product of a marriage between first cousins, Isabella suffered from a severe form of Habsburg jaw so pronounced that she could neither close her mouth properly nor chew solid food, forcing her to subsist on liquids for most of her adult life. Her lower jaw protruded so dramatically that contemporary portraits required artistic manipulation to make her appear even remotely normal. Spanish court records describe how Isabella would drool uncontrollably during state ceremonies, requiring constant attention from servants who would discreetly wipe her chin. Despite her intelligence, Isabella's physical deformities made her unmarriageable by royal standards, and she spent her life as a political pawn whose genetic damage served as a living reminder of her family's toxic bloodline. But Isabella's suffering was just the beginning of the Habsburg genetic nightmare. Taking the 6th spot, Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire. Rudolf II ruled the Holy Roman Empire from 1576 to 1612, but his reign became synonymous with madness, isolation, and genetic deterioration that shocked even the inbred Habsburg court. Born to Maximilian II and Maria of Spain, both carrying multiple generations of Habsburg genetic damage, Rudolf exhibited signs of severe mental illness from childhood that only worsened with age. His condition manifested as crippling depression, so severe that he would disappear from public view for months at a time, emerging only as a pale, trembling figure who spoke to invisible companions and collected bizarre objects obsessively. Rudolf's paranoia reached such extremes that he believed his food was poisoned and would only eat meals prepared by a single trusted servant, yet he simultaneously gorged himself to the point of vomiting, creating a cycle of self-destruction that horrified his court. Contemporary accounts describe Rudolf as having a face that seemed carved from melting wax, with asymmetrical features and a jaw deformity that made normal speech nearly impossible. His genetic damage was so severe that he remained childless, despite multiple relationships, effectively ending his direct line and forcing the Habsburg succession to pass to his equally damaged relatives. And yet, Rudolf's combination of mental and physical deterioration was merely a stepping stone to even more shocking royal deformities. Coming in at number 5, Philip IV of Spain. Philip IV of Spain, who reigned from 1621 to 1665, embodied the devastating peak of Habsburg genetic accumulation, presenting a collection of physical deformities so severe that even his own court struggled to maintain the fiction of royal perfection. Born to Philip III and Margaret of Austria, a union that represented the marriage of uncle to niece, Philip IV inherited what geneticists now call a perfect storm of recessive genetic disorders. His Habsburg jaw was so massively overdeveloped that his lower teeth protruded beyond his upper lip by nearly 2 inches, creating a permanent grimace that made normal speech impossible and eating a grotesque public spectacle. Spanish court records reveal that Philip required specially designed eating utensils and a team of servants to prevent him from choking on his own saliva during state dinners. His body was equally damaged, with one leg significantly shorter than the other, forcing him to wear specially constructed shoes that added 4 inches of height to his left foot. The king's spinal curvature was so pronounced that he appeared to be perpetually bowing, and his arms hung at odd angles due to malformed shoulder joints that caused constant pain. Despite producing multiple children through various marriages, Philip's genetic damage was so severe that most of his offspring died in infancy or exhibited even worse deformities than their father. However, Philip's accumulation of Habsburg defects was still nothing compared to the genetic catastrophes that would follow. Stepping into number 4, Maximilian II of the Holy Roman Empire. Maximilian II, who ruled from 1564 to 1576, represents a crucial link in the Habsburg genetic chain of destruction, demonstrating how each generation's attempts to preserve royal bloodlines only intensified the family's genetic deterioration. Born to Ferdinand the Firm and Anna of Bohemia and Hungary, themselves the product of cousin marriage, Maximilian inherited a complex array of physical and mental abnormalities that would define both his reign and his legacy. Contemporary court. Physicians described Maximilian as suffering from what they called royal melancholy, a condition that manifested as severe depression, punctuated by episodes of manic behavior so extreme that he would spend entire nights redesigning the palace layout or composing hundreds of letters that made no logical sense. His physical appearance was equally disturbing, with a facial asymmetry so pronounced that one side of his face appeared to belong to a different person entirely. Maximilian's left eye sat nearly an inch higher than his right, and his Habsburg jaw created such severe dental problems that he could only consume liquid food for the final decade of his life. What makes Maximilian's case particularly chilling is how his courtiers documented his gradual deterioration, recording how his speech became increasingly slurred and his movements more erratic as the years progressed. His marriage to his first cousin Maria of Spain, only intensified the genetic damage, ensuring that their children would inherit an even more concentrated dose of Habsburg defects. But Maximilian's role as a genetic bridge between generations pales in comparison to the ancient royal bloodlines that pioneered the practice of destructive inbreeding. At number 3, Tutankhamun of Egypt. Taking the third spot is perhaps history's most famous pharaoh, whose golden death mask concealed a body so genetically damaged that modern science has only recently uncovered the full extent of his deformities. Tutankhamun, who ruled Egypt from approximately 1332 to 1323 BCE, was the product of a brother-sister marriage, a common practice among Egyptian royalty that was believed to preserve divine bloodlines, but instead created genetic disasters that haunted the new kingdom. When British archaeologist Howard Carter first examined Tutankhamun's mummy in 1925, he discovered that the young pharaoh's body told a horrifying story of genetic collapse. Modern DNA analysis and CT scans have revealed that Tutankhamun suffered from multiple severe birth defects, including a cleft palate, a severely clubbed left foot that would have made walking extremely painful, and a spinal condition that caused his torso to curve unnaturally. The pharaoh's skull showed signs of temporal lobe epilepsy, and his immune system was so compromised that what should have been minor infections became life-threatening illnesses. Perhaps most shocking of all, Tutankhamun's genetic damage was so extensive that he required over 130 walking sticks to navigate his palace, and many of these canes showed significant wear patterns, indicating that Egypt's god-king spent his brief life as a crippled figure struggling to maintain the appearance of divine authority. His wife, Ankhesenamun, was also his half-sister, and their attempts to produce an heir resulted in 2 stillborn daughters whose mummified remains show even more severe genetic abnormalities. And yet, even Tutankhamun's extensive deformities cannot match the shocking genetic catastrophe of his possible father. Coming in at number 2, Akhenaten of Egypt. Stepping into the second position is Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, whose radical religious reforms may have been driven by genetic deformities so severe that they fundamentally altered his perception of reality and divinity. Ruling Egypt from approximately 1353 to 1336 BCE, Akhenaten was likely the product of multiple generations of sibling marriages within the royal family, creating a genetic profile that has fascinated and horrified scientists for decades. Contemporary, artistic depictions of Akhenaten reveal a figure so physically abnormal that early Egyptologists assumed the images were symbolic rather than realistic. But modern genetic analysis suggests these portraits may have been accurate representations of his shocking appearance. Akhenaten's skull was severely elongated and enlarged, creating a head that appeared almost alien compared to normal human proportions, while his torso showed pronounced feminine characteristics, including enlarged breasts and wide hips that suggested severe hormonal imbalances. His limbs were grotesquely thin and elongated, giving him a spider-like appearance that must have been deeply unsettling to his subjects. What makes Akhenaten's case particularly disturbing is how his physical deformities may have influenced his revolutionary decision to abandon Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion in favor of worshipping a single sun god, Aten. Some researchers theorize that Akhenaten's genetic damage affected his brain chemistry in ways that created intense religious hallucinations and megalomaniacal delusions, leading him to believe he was the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine. His marriage to Nefertiti, who was likely his sister or half-sister, continued the cycle of genetic destruction, producing daughters who showed similar physical abnormalities and mental instabilities. However, even Akhenaten's combination of physical deformity and psychological damage cannot compare to the ultimate example of royal genetic catastrophe. Taking the number 1 spot, Charles II of Spain. At the top of our list stands Charles II of Spain, whose life represents the absolute pinnacle of royal genetic destruction and serves as history's most devastating example of what happens when inbreeding reaches its logical conclusion. Born in 1661 to Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria, a marriage between uncle and niece that represented the final catastrophic link in generations of Habsburg intermarriage, Charles inherited such an enormous concentration of genetic defects that he barely qualified as functionally human. His Habsburg jaw was so massively overdeveloped that his mouth could not close, causing him to drool constantly and making coherent speech virtually impossible, while his tongue was so enlarged that most of his utterances were incomprehensible grunts and moans. Charles's physical deformities were staggering in their scope and severity. He could not walk until age 8, could not speak clearly until age 10, and remained intellectually disabled throughout his entire life, with contemporary accounts describing his mental capacity as barely equivalent to that of a young child. His head was grotesquely oversized and misshapen, his body was weak and underdeveloped, and he suffered from constant seizures that would leave him unconscious for hours at a time. What makes Charles's case truly heartbreaking is how his genetic damage affected every aspect of his existence. He was impotent and thus unable to produce an heir, despite 2 marriages. He was prone to mysterious illnesses that baffled court, physicians, and he was so physically repulsive that even his own mother struggled to show him affection. Spanish court records reveal that Charles required constant care from teams of servants who would feed him, clean him, and physically support him during the rare public appearances that his handlers deemed necessary for maintaining royal authority. His death in 1700 at age 38 effectively ended the Spanish Habsburg line and triggered the War of Spanish Succession, making Charles II not just a genetic catastrophe, but a political disaster whose very existence reshaped European history. These 10 monarchs remind us that power without wisdom, tradition without science, and purity without understanding can transform even the mightiest bloodlines into genetic nightmares. Their legacy serves as a chilling testament to the devastating consequences of believing that royal blood was somehow different from common humanity.